everyone. This is your Arlington Dollar, and I'm James Milan. I am here today with Paul Tierney, who is our Director of Assessments in town, and he oversees the Assessor's Office. And it is a popular moment, let us say, for the Assessor's Office because the new assessments have just come out and gone to everybody's homes. And we're here to talk with Paul about that and many other aspects of the work that they do. Paul, first of all, thanks very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
We really appreciate it.
Sure.
To begin with, why don't you just tell us a little bit, because I think that on the whole, the Assessor's Office is an invisible entity in town. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do. Just give us an introduction to the office itself and to yourself also, because I understand you've been at this job a few years.
Yeah.
So tell us how long you've been here and what your office does.
So I've been working for the town of Arlington for 4 years now. My previous position was Director of Assessments in Winthrop, Mass. So basically the function of our office is to value all property at fair market value. We value real estate, personal property, and we deal with excise tax a lot as well. Those are the main functions of the office. We also process exemptions for seniors, veterans, and programs like that to help ease the tax burden.
Mm-hmm. So I think the assessments on people's property is going to be what is going to take most of our time. But as you just said that, I realize that to begin with, I'd just like to dispense with a little piece of curiosity I have. Excise taxes, which apply to automobiles exclusively? Or,
correct.
How much do those change over time and for what reasons?
They're valued by the state, puts the value on the vehicles. In the first year of manufacturing, they're valued at 90%, and then it incrementally goes down every year, down to, I believe, 60, then 50, then 40, and after the fifth year, that's your flat rate for the remainder of how long you own your car.
Okay, but basically for your guys' purposes, you're just processing.
Correct. We don't put any values on the vehicles. That all comes from the Registry of Motor Vehicles.
Okay. So let's start talking about people's home assessments. Sure. Because again, at this moment in early January, every year the new assessments come out. It's never good news for homeowners necessarily here in Arlington, but this is a particularly dramatic year.
Yeah.
So why don't you explain a little bit both what the average rise in assessment has been and what goes into those figures? Okay,
so our job, we're tasked with finding the fair market value of all properties. Since Arlington is mostly residential, we go comparable sales for all the condos and single-family homes, two and three-family homes. We look at the sales of what you're selling your home for at that particular time. So we're in fiscal 19. We use calendar year 2017 sales to determine fiscal 19 values. We look at every neighborhood in town. There are 12 neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods saw a bigger increase than others based on the sales activity in that particular neighborhood. And after we compile all of our data, we have to submit it annually to the Department of Revenue for their approval. And once we get their approval, that's when we can move forward with our the functions of our office, hold our classification hearing, start setting the tax rate.
What does their approval depend on, and how often do you not get their approval from the Department of Revenue?
They set statistical guidelines, and they look for our values to be in those statistical guidelines. So our values in Massachusetts, your home's supposed to be valued at 100% full and fair cash value, and you have a 10% swing either way. So once we value all the properties, they have to be within that 90%. They cannot be below 90% for that particular year of full and fair cash value. And we have never not gotten approval from the Department of Revenue.
That makes sense. They have other things to be doing with their time as well, right? But one thing I do want to get out on the table that, again, it's not good news, but let's talk about it. And that is the average rise that people can expect to see here in town this year.
Overall values rose 13.9% throughout the town. That was mostly within the single family and condominium classes of property.
And is that 14, well, we're just going to call it 14%.
14, sure.
Is that 14% since last year?
Correct.
So in a single year?
Yes.
And what is the average, over time, what has been about the average rise? What does that compare to, in other words?
I think, if my memory serves, last year I think was close to 9%, maybe a little less. But you figure it's in that particular area. But this year was just a year where prices were skyrocketing, and you have to keep up.
And is that mostly in your experience, is that mostly because basically Arlington is hot in general as a real estate market, and then there are some portions of Arlington which are hotter still, and that's what you're talking about?
Exactly, yes. It's just a desirable place to live right now, and people are paying premium prices for homes throughout the town.
And you were mentioning that there are 12 neighborhoods in
Correct.
town for your guys' purposes. Which of those are the ones where you're seeing the property values rise the most dramatically?
The most dramatic this year were East Arlington, Kelwin Manor, and up in Jason Heights. There were a few. Those are the most drastic ones. There were other neighborhoods that did see a pretty large increase, but those are the three biggest ones.
Okay. So when we're talking about numbers like a 9% rise last year, 14% rise this year, et cetera, I think some folks, and let's just, I know that this is a distinction that is very clear for you, let's just make it clear for everybody. Folks might wonder, wait a minute, I thought Proposition 2.5 means that our property taxes can't go up more than 2.5% or something like that. Can you explain?
Yes, Proposition
That
2.5.
discrepancy.
Proposition 2.5 has to do with how much the town can raise from year to year over last year's levy, which is used to. That's the budget that the town has. That's the amount of money the town has to raise to pay their budget. The 2.5% does not pertain to an individual's tax bill. It's how much the town can raise from last year's levy. You cannot raise it more than 2.5, plus new growth, and any exemptions or debt exclusions that might be involved.
And so are you saying that then it's totally unconnected to what you do?
Correct.
Which is just measuring and marking and then charging for the rise in people's, in the actual value of people's
We're just
homes.
looking for market value. Prop 2.5 is a statutory built into every city and town in Massachusetts.
So we have spoken with others on this series before about these issues, and as far as I understand it, basically, while the town's levy, which is the cumulative amount of money that they are taking in through property taxes, I believe, can only go up 2.5%. There can be much larger fluctuations in people's individual tax bills.
Correct. That is correct.
Okay. And when you are assessing fair market value, what are the factors that go into that? And specifically, wondering whether similarly sized houses in different neighborhoods are going to have very different assessments, or similar, and in addition to that, so one is comparable houses in different neighborhoods. Second question I have is different houses on the same street, or different size houses, let's say, in the same neighborhood. How does that kind of thing play out?
Well, you look at any particular neighborhood and you take every house that's similar, and okay, so a colonial sells for X amount of dollars on a particular street. That's basically what your neighbor's house is going to sell for. Now, that colonial might sell for X amount of dollars in one neighborhood and X amount of dollars in another neighborhood, depending on the upgrades to it, the size of the house, the size of the lot. But it all depending on, and then the condition on the inside has a factor as well. If you've renovated recently, of course you're going to get more money for it. But if your neighbor's home is selling for $700,000, chances are your house is going to sell for $700,000 if it's a comparable home. And it can be not just on your street, but in your particular neighborhood.
You know, you're very familiar, I'm sure, with services like Zillow, a service where online you can get some kind of estimate, supposedly informed estimate of what your what you might be able to sell your house for. Conversations that I've had with our neighbors, I live here in Arlington, with our neighbors, but also with other folks in town who look at that every once in a while. They have seen, and it's true on the street that I live on, that if you look at what the Zillow figures are for a number of different houses, because they're all presented in one go there are big fluctuations there. $250,000 difference in some cases, people have noted. Is that kind of difference reflected also in assessments?
Yeah, it can be, depending on the size of your home and the size of your lot. There could be a large swing, even if they are on the same street, yes.
Okay.
250 might be, on the high end, but...
It's pretty extreme,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it can be, it'd have to be a much larger house and a much larger lot, I think, for it to be that extreme.
And, okay, so more importantly, let us move on to talk about the impact of what is going on at the moment. People are opening their mail, looking at their new assessments, and I know that you here in the assessor's office in these early days in January are getting a lot of feedback. Folks are walking in, and we were talking before we went on camera. They're not happy on the whole.
Yeah, not everybody. It's unfortunate. I understand. It's a bit of sticker shock this year, for sure. But like I try to explain to them that these are fair market value for your home. Some people are more upset than others. Other people understand what's going on. They understand the process, and they're okay with that. They want an explanation as to why the price jumped as high as it did. I tell them the process that we go through and how we got to that value, and some people are okay with that, and some are not. So you just deal with them on an individual basis and try to get them to understand where you're coming from.
And as human beings, we're obviously all going to have just different reactions to situations
Absolutely.
like this, and people's perspectives and reactions will be different, I understand. But as a group, it seems for sure like the people who were most directly affected and perhaps most anxious in opening those envelopes are those who are on fixed incomes in town for whatever reason, or who just can't do much about their income, either because of their age or some other aspect of their life situation. What kinds of relief, or if there's any good news for folks like that, what is it?
Well, for the seniors, we do have exemption programs for seniors, elderly, veterans. They can apply through the assessor's office to get some relief on their taxes. There are income and asset guidelines that we have to follow. We do have a chart on the assessor's webpage that explains all the different programs that we do have and what you need to qualify. If they have any questions from there, they can also call the office. We're happy to explain the procedures. And also the town does now have the senior work-off program, where a resident can work in a town office and then get credited towards their tax bill. We're allowing up to $1,500, but it is taxable, so net it out to maybe $1,300 or something if they perform their services within a department in the town.
And that's, I would assume, some number of hours per week, not
yeah,
not a ton.
They have about 6 months to complete it, so they can come in 4 hours a day, 1 day a week, and just, it's basic.
That's the kind of time frame or the time commitment you're talking about.
It's not too much, and it's mostly in my office. our senior work-off person is doing filing and just putting our files away and helping us in that regard.
Okay, so there are a number of mechanisms and programs in town that can provide relief for folks, but let's be clear that there's also some issues with those, right? In that you were mentioning that there are exemptions, or not exemptions. I think you have to qualify in terms of income, right, at income level.
You do. There's an income restrictions on some of them, and asset restrictions
as well.
And there also is a complete tax deferral that is another option that people can take advantage of.
Do you want to explain that a little bit more?
It's not the most popular option out there. It's a tax deferral. You have to, you don't pay the taxes on your home.
You would not pay the taxes?
You would not pay the taxes, but when you go to sell it, now those taxes have to be be paid when this home is sold. Mm-hmm. So we only have about 10 of those in town right now. I think it's a good option for some of the seniors out there. We'd like to see some of them take more advantage of it. It just hasn't happened yet.
So let's look at some. I'd love to just illustrate what you were just talking about with some numbers. If a person, for instance, had a $400,000 house here, I don't know if it's unfair to ask you for just a general ballpark figure of what their property taxes would be on that.
Off the top of my head, I'd say it's got to be close to 5,000. I don't know the math on that one. I'm sorry, off the top of my head.
That's fine. And again, I appreciate the fact that it's not necessarily a fair question. But let's take 5, or let's even say 8.
Yeah.
Just to really, so what you're saying is that somebody looking at this as an option would have to consider that, okay, they're looking at 400,000, and let's say they own their home free and clear.
Yeah.
So they've got 400,000 at some point down the line, and you're saying that's going to, for all the years between now and then that you don't pay your taxes, that's 8,
Right.
and then it'll go up from there probably.
Yeah.
But that would give people a sense, if that's what you're talking about, that you're chipping away at that $400,000 by $8 or $9 or $10,000 per year, then hopefully that gives people a sense that a time frame that they're looking at, maybe of 5 years or 10 years or something like that, having to do that, may not be too unpalatable in the end.
I think it's a good option. I wish more seniors that are struggling would take advantage of it. We can't make them do it. We offer it. We hope that they do. But at the end of the day, it's still up to the homeowner to
do you think
take advantage. It's just not something.
Do you think people's resistance is psychological more than anything else?
I think when they go to sell it at that particular time, they want it free and clear. That's basic. That's the most feedback we've gotten on that one. Is I want my house to be free and clear. Whether they want to give it to their children, at the end with no tax liens on it. I think seems like it's the biggest reason people give us.
Are you aware, because we have talked to other town officials about this, and again, Arlington is a town in which there is a solid sense that the government, our local government, cares about all constituencies in this town, and especially, or at least as much, the most vulnerable as any others. Are you aware of any ideas that we haven't mentioned that are not yet in place for relief for folks in these situations that the town might be considering, or looking at least over the next little while?
We are looking at what is called the senior circuit breaker tax. I don't have all the details on that, but that is another program that we're going to try to implement within the coming year that would give seniors some relief as well.
Okay. So, while it's mostly just, there's not a lot that can be done about the fact that Arlington is a town in which property values and the value that you can sell your house for is rising rapidly, continuing to rise rapidly. That's going to bring a lot of current expenses along with it. And there's not not, you know, it's easy to say this, and we've said it before on various of our public affairs programs. It's a good problem to have, right?
Yes.
Nonetheless, it's a problem for
Yeah,
folks, and we
some
want to
folks, yes,
acknowledge
it
that.
is, absolutely.
Can you explain what the tax rate is and how that factors into an assessment?
Well, the tax rate is the amount of money that needs to be raised, which is the levy, divided by all the taxable value in town. That's all taxable value, times $1,000, and that'll give you your tax rate. Now, a person, to come up with a person's tax bill, you take their assessment, multiply it by the tax rate, divide it by 1,000, and that's your tax bill for the year.
Okay. And so what we understand, so give us a sense of well, first of all, what the current tax rate is and how much that goes up or down, and whether if it goes down, people are going to see actually a lower not a lower assessment, but whether their property taxes will go down, or if not, why not?
Well, the tax rate goes down if all the values are going up. If the values are going down, the tax rate is going up because the budget still has to be paid no matter how much you raise. And you're raising a different amount every year. So now if you have this amount you're raising, the tax values go up, now you have a lower tax rate. The values go down, you have a higher tax rate. It all just kind of plays off each other, the two of them.
I see. I think I understand what you mean. And let me throw this at you, and you just tell me if I'm right or wrong, and how wrong I am, in fact.
Sure.
When you say times 1,000, so if again, let's go back, or let's take a house that's worth $400,000. Is it fair to say that the tax rate is the amount of money per $1,000 of that $400,000 total?
Correct.
Okay. So people can have a sense that if the tax rate, what is the current tax rate?
$11.26.
So $11.26 per $1,000 of their assessed value.
Correct.
Is what their tax bill will actually be.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Can I ask you to explain the difference, what an abatement, a tax abatement versus a tax exemption is,
Yep.
and what the difference is between them?
Well, the exemptions are for the seniors, veterans. We have a surviving spouse one, we have an extreme hardship, and the deferral. Those are all governed by the Department of Revenue, the state, and we have guidelines we have to follow. An abatement is relief on your property tax bill if you are overassessed. You're overassessed of what you think your house is for fair market value. If you're disproportionately assessed from your neighbors, or if we've misclassified your house, say you live in a single family, but we're taxing you as a 3-family. Those are the reasons to file for an abatement and to get a relief on your property tax bill.
So how does an exemption function then? Your abatement would be you'd actually get your tax bill reduced?
Yes, an exemption. Yes, we received the abatement form from the homeowner, process it. You know, the assessors take their end, we send it over to the treasurers, they refund the taxpayer an exemption. We take the information in, we put it into our financial software, and it's reduced from the person's tax bill on the 3rd and 4th quarter.
Okay. So is it fair to say then that one fundamental difference between the two is an abatement is going to mean that whatever's happened to trigger that abatement has happened already, and you're going to get some kind of refund
Correct.
as a result? And then an exemption is applied to future taxes.
It's on your current tax bill, yes.
Just reduces those tax bills,
Correct.
those
Yes.
numbers by X amount. So with exemptions, if seniors or other of the qualified groups you were talking about do qualify for exemptions, do they need to reassert that or requalify every year?
Yes, they do need to apply every year, just so we know that they are still in town and are, eligible for this particular, for that particular exemption.
And in terms of abatements, you were saying that, and I know it's not as simple as this, but you were saying that, one reason for an abatement would be if a person's property was over-assessed. And I'm sure that there are many more people who think themselves that they were been over-assessed than actually qualify for an abatement. How is it that that would be determined?
Well, I would take, if a particular taxpayer came into the office, filed an abatement, I would look at their property. I would look at similar properties that sold in calendar year 2017 if they filed in fiscal 2019. I would look at all similar properties, similar style of homes, similar neighborhood, similar finishes on the inside, number of bathrooms, bedrooms, finished basement, anything like that. And if I determined by what's selling currently in the market, I would base my decision on that, me as well as the Board of Assessors.
So the process of potentially qualifying for an abatement would begin with the homeowner coming in and filing some kind of form.
Correct.
And that in turn would trigger an investigation of what went into your assessment by your office.
Right. The taxpayer would give us the abatement form. They typically give us their reason as to why they think they're overvalued. We'll take that all into consideration. We'll do our own due diligence, do a physical inspection, look at comparable sales within that neighborhood, and make our decision from there.
Okay, great.
And if they do not agree with our decision, say, for instance, if they're denied, they can appeal to the Appellate Tax Board. They're located in Boston. And then if it goes forward, we go into the Appellate Tax Board. The taxpayer gives their side of the story, I give mine, and then an independent commissioner will give his ruling on whether or not they should be granted abatement or denied.
I assume those situations are pretty rare?
They are. There's a few, just a couple a year, basically, that go that far, yes. But it is an option if you feel very strongly about, your assessment.
What would you say is important for people to understand that the Board of Assessors or that the assessor's office here in town does not do?
Well, it'd be important if they know that we do not raise or lower taxes. The amount of taxes charged is determined by the amount of tax dollars or the tax levy that's required to cover the cost of all the local services. Now, the tax levy is determined by town spending, which is determined by voters at town meeting. So while we are responsible for determining each person's share of the levy, we do not have any control over an individual's tax bill.
An important distinction.
Yes, we're just trying to spread everyone's tax bill across evenly so that everyone's paying their fair share.
In addition to things like home improvements, what are the factors that go into determining, property or land assessment?
The size of size of a building and land has a lot to do with it. Depending on your number of bathrooms would affect your assessment. If you had a finished third floor, say you have a colonial, but you do have attic space, and if that is finished, that is taxable. Also, if you finish your basement, that is also taxable. Those are factors that some people do not take into consideration sometimes because they don't know, and I understand that, but those are factors that will increase your assessment.
And just out of curiosity, is there any way of measuring, or is there any effort to measure or take into account potential use of property for, say, Airbnb purposes when it comes to assessment?
No, not to my knowledge as of yet, no.
Okay. I think people are familiar with the fact that we all had notice of it, and we may even have seen folks moving through town in recent months completing an assessment that looked very physical. Looked like you folks were inspecting, so to speak, or assessing each of our houses. How often does that happen? What is its function? What are they doing in that case? And yeah.
So this particular project that we just completed, that's a 10-year cyclical data collection project that every city and town is required to go through. We have to physically inspect every property in town just to make sure that our data is accurate. Sometimes there are certain situations where an addition is put on and it's not picked up, and that person is now paying on a house that's not fully valued. So that's basically why this is done every 10 years, to pick up stuff that may have fallen through the cracks, that every city and town is required to do every 10 years.
And other than that, you're basically compiling you're reevaluating your assessment each year on the basis of forms that people fill out and turn in terms of...
Yeah, after every year we send out sales verification forms to people that have bought recently in town to help us determine whether they're if the information that we have is consistent with what they have just purchased, and if they were arm's length sale, if they were bought from a family member, if they were foreclosure. So we use all that to help us determine our arm's length sales throughout the town.
And from what I understand, or I have heard that there is some kind of assessment that is done on a 5-year basis, and I'm unclear as to what that means.
That's every city in town has to undergo a 5-year revaluation program that the Department of Revenue looks at our values a lot closer in those particular years. They just look for our statistics and our depreciation schedules to be in compliance as to what they deem acceptable. Every year we do make interim year adjustments though, but the 5-year revaluation program is a lot more intense, and it receives a lot more scrutiny from the Department of Revenue before we get our approvals.
I assume some people may just be curious about, and others may be considering perhaps filing for an abatement based on a perceived overcharging or overassessment. In both cases, they might be curious to know what the assessed value of their neighbors' properties are. Is that easy enough to find out, and if so, how? Yes,
we do have a link on the assessor's website that will allow you to look up every property in town. Unfortunately, we've had some troubles with our vendor. They're working on to correct it, so I'm hoping by the end of this particular week that those values will be online, and everybody will be able to see current, up-to-date values of everybody in town, their neighbors, people across town. So it's just been a little delay. I apologize for it, but we are working on it to correct it.
Right, so bad timing for vendor problem. Very. In that people's interest is more intense now than ever. But what I hear you saying is that in general, that is available for everybody in Arlington once the glitch gets taken care of or whatever, and in general throughout the year, that's always available.
Yes.
It's an option. So Paul, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 questions that you get asked as the director or as an office?
The top question is the value taxes of the home. Although, like we just covered, the taxes aren't technically associated with my office, but it's the value of the homes that we get the most questions on. A lot of excise questions we do get. Most people think that the town puts the value on the vehicles, but we do not. It's done by the Registry of Motor Vehicles, and exemptions for the seniors and stuff, etc. We do get some questions on those. But the top question is value of the properties.
All right, it has been once again, a very comprehensive and expansive conversation. We appreciate your taking the time to cover an area, frankly, as we said at the outset, that for lots of the year people don't think about until they do very, very intensely. And we happen to be, as we all know, on the cusp of decisions to be made this coming spring, which is going to further hit people's pocketbooks in terms of the structural override and the debt exclusion that are going to likely be on the table this spring. So interesting to, again, be covering this topic, this subject matter with you right now, where people are up in arms,
Yes.
as we can tell, from, not perhaps fully understanding what goes into the bad news that they've just opened up and looked at in their envelope. So thank you for explaining quite thoroughly all that does go into that.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Our hope is that for our audience that it will be a little bit easier to swallow that pill now that they understand a little bit better how it came to be. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Good luck.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
For our Director of Assessment, Paul Tierney, I'm James Milan. This is Your Arlington Dollar. Thanks for joining us.